Vineet, it's a pleasure to welcome you. We were just having our little chat before the formal process of this interview that you are one of the largest logistics company in India. An amazing time to be in this business, although you're the third generation running this business. But India is growing by leaps and bounds. Recently, we were the fifth largest economy in the world, and the next decade or more, aspiring to be the third largest, and so on. Good time to be in the business, but before I get into the nuts and bolts of the space that you're in, I wanted to touch base on familial businesses. You said your grandfather had started this business. I get the opportunity to meet leaders who are running familial businesses, and there is a good course that is being done at Indian School of Business in collaboration with Kellogg's, etc. Transitioning from generation to the next is a big challenge, but seems like your family has done pretty well, So just wanted to learn a bit about the transition of familiar businesses and how do you see that moving forward?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Family businesses need to evolve as things change over time. So one of the most important things is what is the intent that you want for a family business? Do you want to remain small and you want to remain in a certain way where you are running the show, or you want to move it to a more professional setup? What we did in the evolution the last 25 years is that to make it into a more professional setup where all the SBUs are really headed by CEOs and professionals who are really the best in the work that they do. And the family has moved to a more strategic role, to a more investor kind of a role. I think this is a very important thing that generations have to realize, that to go there is not so easy. I think one of the most important things is to build trust with the professionals that you're working, and there itself you will start creating leaders. So I think family businesses in all parts of the world, including India, are at the cusp of changes, and you have to embrace those changes and you have to move on with it.
The question is about the growth of India. Infrastructure is very critical, very important, and we see that growth happening across the country, especially when it comes to road building. And for companies like yours, very, very important. To meet those standards that is required, because the growth is pretty hyper for those things. Two sides again. One is aligning with the government's interests where they are trying to build this infrastructure. I'm sure you also have inputs in how you want that to be, to be seen growing. How do you see that happening in terms of aligning your interests with the growth in the economy?
So the business that we come from, we run is logistics and supply chain management in India, and India has we move about 2.5% of India's GDP by value of cargo every year using different modes of transport. The logistics cost in India is quite high, and for India to be competitive globally as well as nationally, this needs to come down. And there are essentially three ways that this can happen. First is to shift the mode of transport from road, which is about 60-65% of the overall freight transport, into other modes of transport like railways or to coastal shipping. India has a fabulous coastline that we do not use very effectively. So when that mode starts shifting, you will have two changes happening. One is the cost will come down, and the second, it is also green logistics, because you're using less carbon emissions when you're moving it to different modes of transport. The second is standardization. I mean, you would have seen in India different kinds of trucks, different kinds of equipment that are there. And in fact, cargo is not even palletized in many cases. So when that standardization starts to happen, we will see efficiency and productivity improve, and hence you will see that logistics costs will fall. The third is digitization. That's a very important aspect, because you have a lot of documentation that is required at every level, and that is now coming onto a single platform called ULIP, which is a Unified Logistics Interface Platform, where all the service providers and all the stakeholders, be it from banks to the customs authorities to your invoicing, everything will come onto a single platform, which would mean that things would move more seamlessly, which would reduce the bureaucratic delays, that happen, and ultimately reducing logistics cost. So all of these things, coupled by the fact that the government is spending a lot on infrastructure, is certainly going to help this sector.
You were mentioning earlier about the opportunity in terms of consumer behavior, especially during the pandemic. A lot of e-commerce players have moved into it, and obviously it needs a lot more logistics. The behavior could be not just because of pandemic, but obviously the consumer behavior across the world has changed. So how do you see that evolve and impacting the business?
Not just the fact that consumer behavior has changed in the pandemic, but there are a lot of other changes that are coming in India. So clearly with consumers consuming more and more online, and you know that India has really leapfrogged in digital payments, it has made things much easier with the online shopping, etc., which meant that supply chains have to change, which meant that the way that you handle your inventory has to change, which means that there's a very high growth of warehouses in India. You have many online players that have come, and the existing players have added online lines in their existing warehouses, etc. So there's a large evolution that's happening because of consumer behavior changes. Even the fact that we are eating out more often or ordering food from QSRs more and more meant that even the food supply chain has changed. So that's one aspect from a consumer behavior perspective. Companies are wanting to outsource more and more, so that's another aspect of change. The other aspect is really the soft infrastructure, what the government requires in terms of your formalization of the economy. So India introduced GST a few years ago. It introduced a system of e-way bill, etc., which is leading to companies have to become formal, which means that you have to put your invoices online, which means that you have to really get into from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. This is leading to a big change in terms of logistics also. The third aspect which I touched upon is infrastructure growth. The government has started something called the PM Gati Shakti program, which is essentially a coordination of all the various ministries into all kinds of infrastructure development that's happening all over the country. And that is a big thing because the more than $1 trillion is expected to be spent in the next 4-5 years on infrastructure. And many of these will be related to multimodal infrastructure, which is rail terminals or sea ports, etc., which will ultimately also help India be more competitive.
My last question is on leadership. Very critical for organization to grow. On one side is the leadership that needs to empower, inspire, educate the workforce. On the other side is the workforce, with a lot of opportunities available in the market, very competing market, and you have to keep abreast with what the market and the competition is doing. How do you balance that as a leader of the organization?
It is an important aspect for every CEO to think about leadership, not just from a perspective of perpetuity, but also from the fact that you have a lot of influence with your stakeholders. When I entered the business 25 years ago, I had the same challenges. I had studied in the US and I came in asking for more. And clearly this is what the trend is. Perhaps the rate of change is slightly faster now. And I think it's a leader is someone who is able to give these opportunities for other people to grow. And in our organization, we do that. We have a leadership development program. We send people for training programs, not just in India, but overseas as well. We then have these SBUs where people can rise up to become the CEOs of those divisions. And then subsequently, what we've seen that they are also able to influence other people in their ecosystem as well as beyond that. So it is an important factor, leadership development and understanding the needs of today's youngsters as well as aspirations, and then aligning your business to some extent to that. But the most important thing here is your culture, your value systems. You have to ensure that they align into that, because that is what is going to make a difference between a company that is successful and not so successful in the long run.
Yeah, very well said. Ending on that great note, culture is critical for any organization. I appreciate you coming and taking your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.